It's Mari McInerney from Croakey here at the Victorian Mental Illness Awareness Council annual conference in Melbourne. And I have one of the keynote speakers here, Dr. Daniel Fisher. Could you introduce yourself in the sense of all your affiliations, please?
Well, first affiliation is that, as you probably detected, I'm from Cambridge, Massachusetts, from the States. I'm a person with lived experience. That's probably my most important teaching. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in my 20s and decided I wanted to become a psychiatrist. And so I got an MD. I also have a PhD in biochemistry. But what I'm most interested in is really what I can do to change the system. So I started a center called the National Empowerment Center about 27 years ago, and I'm still the CEO of it, and also started a countrywide coalition called the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery to really do advocacy.
And you've worked with the White House, not this current one?
Yes, I've worked with the White House, not the current one, it's true. I worked with the Bush W. White House. I was on the White House Commission for Mental Health in 2002, 2003. It was a surprise to me and a lot of people that I got appointed.
Why do you say that?
Well, because I've been an outspoken person with lived experience. I'm more a psychiatric survivor than a mental health consumer. And our movement has been historically split between the survivors and the consumers. And survivors really want to replace the existing system and feel that it's beyond repair. The consumers are like, well, just make a few little reforms. So that's why I was surprised, because it's a government body. But I had and continue to do a lot of work around recovery, and had developed a fair profile, I guess, around that.
Your journey is a fairly unusual one, from person with lived experience through to being a clinician, and you hinted at some of the conflicts that causes.
Oh yeah.
What made you want to go on to being a clinician after you had what was life-changing but also distressing experiences?
Well, it actually it happened while I was in seclusion. My second hospitalization came from anger. I just was so furious at being locked up, forcibly injected, locked up, put in seclusion. And I mean, I was put in seclusion basically because I was too happy. You can't be too happy or too sad or too angry or too frightened. You really can't have, it's better not to have any feelings. If anybody out there ever happens to get locked up in a psychiatric hospital, don't share your feelings. It's not a safe place to do it. But, so I was in seclusion because I'd had a pass, and on the pass, I'd actually had an opportunity to go to my laboratory. Ironically, when I was hospitalized that time, 1970, I was working as a neurochemist across the street from the hospital I was in. I was in a Navy hospital, Bethesda Naval Hospital, and I could look across the street at our National Institutes of Mental Health. And I was a PhD neurochemist there, studying dopamine and serotonin biosynthesis, and then trying to find the chemical cause, of which they have no chemical basis at this point, and I don't think they ever will. It's very individualized. But I didn't know that at that point. I was just a 25-year-old listening to what the authorities were telling me, and I dutifully got my PhD. But the more I did research, the more I got alienated, depressed, and felt hopeless about finding anything like that. But nonetheless, it was nice to get a break, nice to get out. I'd been hospitalized. I'd been in the hospital for 2-3 months. And I went over to my lab. People were so happy to see me. And I went back, and they said on the unit, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I feel 11. You need medicine." Up his Thorazine. It was the days of Thorazine. So I get injected into seclusion. Wow, you just have to be so careful what you say and do. And so I really felt my spirit being drained from me. And there are two things that I did before I blacked out. And one was I imagined my spirit as a blue bird going out of the window, through the locked window, to safety, out of this terrible situation. And the second thing I did was I vowed to myself, if I ever get out of this place, I'm going to become a psychiatrist. I'm going to unlock every one of these facilities. Nobody's going to have to go into them. I went back to my lab. My boss wanted me to continue because I was doing very good, besides all these ins and outs, very good research. But I told him I had to leave. And he was like, I never understand why anybody would leave something if they do well. And I said, I hate it. I hate going to a laboratory. So I went to medical school. I took a couple of courses, and it was hard. I had another, episode, which I call basically need for further healing. I went back into my own world to rearrange further the parts of myself so that I could really sort of grasp onto my life more. And luckily, I was in 2 weeks, and luckily I got out. There was a big exam, but my friends in my class brought me notes, passed the exam, got through medical school. But even harder than medical school was the residency in psychiatry, because they're watching you very carefully. And I went to Boston, and the reason I went to Boston is because they had a ex-patient, they called it then, advocacy group called the Mental Patient Liberation Front. And they didn't want to accept me at first because I was going there to do my residency in psychiatry at a Harvard teaching hospital. And I didn't go there because of Harvard, though. I went there because of the Mental Patient Liberation Front.
That's great. I didn't know of it. You talked here about, and you've hinted about that a bit in talking about your journey, about the idea of people with mental health or with mental illness as it's diagnosed.
People with lived experience.
People with lived experience of being the canaries.
Yes.
What are they the canaries for?
Well, we're in a toxic culture. So I bring up the analogy of the canaries in the coal mine, because coal miners took canaries and they would die from the toxic fumes. Fortunately, before the coal miners, they knew it was time to get out. Kind of sad for the canaries. I'm a lover of birds too, so I have to be careful about it. But we, I feel, are living, and especially in this industrial world. And Melbourne, I mean, it's a lovely city, but I can see it's developing the way American cities are too, and European ones, which it's a toxic culture, and partly toxic because the isolation and the lack of community, also the alienation from any nature. I went to the botanical garden. I loved it there. It's a lovely garden here, but most people aren't even going there. And also the economic system, capitalism. It's in the United States. It's reached a horribly extreme form, and that the separation in income is so huge, and then also the materialism that people feel. And I believe, and I'm working on a book, and I'm thinking the title of it might be emotional, that our biggest climate change is emotional climate change. And that's, I think, a lot of the source of our physical climate change. And one example is, and this is where the toxicity comes in, because we feel alienated, disempowered, isolated, basically traumatized, we feel like we need a lot of energy. We need lights on all the time. We need speed. We need Harley Davidson. In the U.S., again, is the most extreme case, but beware, it can happen anywhere, any of these countries. And a lot of countries look at the U.S. and think, oh, I want one of those nice, shiny, new, whatever. Bad idea. And we use up 25% of the world's energy and we're only 5% of the world's population. And I think it's because this is the emotional climate change crisis, and we're trying to fulfill. And we can, unless we address it, renewable energy won't mean anything, because we'll just have endless need for energy. Anyway, I want to bring those movements together.
Yeah, I think we're going to get tossed out soon. So if I can jump to one of the things you talked about in your keynote was about a warning really for the consumer movement.
I am. Not to get co-opted.
What did you mean?
Well, the system from our advocacy, beware of what you ask for. We've over 15 years of repeated, insistent advocacy, and it was reinforced by the commission that I was on, that our White House commission said, hire a peer, train a peer, bring them on board. But what it didn't say was change the culture, change the system. So you can't just plug in a peer. It's like pick a peer or add water, add a peer. But the culture remains the same. I just know so many people who have gone into that who feel so disempowered, and they feel it works against their recovery. Because self-determination is one of the most critical elements, and the system is explicitly set up against self-determination.
So what do consumers and people who've lived experience do?
What do we do? We have to reorganize. We have to go back to our roots. And I've been reading the early works of our movement. I'm like second generation, so I'm going back to the first generation. People like Judy Chamberlain, Leonard Frank, Howie the Harp, they were all remarkable people, and they started in 1970, 71, and they laid down, it has to be a separatist movement. You don't go and get jobs in the system. You don't rely on the system for money. You can't expect the system to change itself. It has to be changed from outside. We can link up with the disability movement. We can link up with the other intersectionalities of oppression. So link up with civil rights. We link up with the LGBTQ community and see this as it's an overall liberation. It's not just our struggle. So we're trying solely to do that. We have, through our national organization, the National Coalition of Mental Health Recovery, once we got that, brought the consumers and survivors together, we then connected with other disability groups that are run by persons with disability. And that's very essential too, because like in the autism world, there's Autism Speaks, which is the parents, then there's autistic self-advocates. So each of the ones in this other organization we got started are all run by people with lived experience.
That's the key. So you had some call-outs to people at the end of your keynote. I'm aware that we've got people pouring into our room. So your call-outs are?
Well, if you want to make a change, you have to organize, first and foremost. And also develop in the organizing, as labor unions have organized or women have organized, to also develop a voice. And I think we have a special challenge, which I didn't get to go into in my talk, in the mental health system, and that is that our voice is systematically removed. And of course, I don't mean by voice just words, it's the expression of self. And to try to rectify this, and also to try to overcome the cultural problem, because the cultural problem isn't just the culture of the mental health system, it's the larger culture that we live in. We've developed emotional CPR. And emotional CPR, I don't think it'll solve all the problems, but it's for anyone to assist anyone. So it's for parents, it's for ambulance people, it's for grocery people, it's for every human being. And this has been now my last 12 years, my life work. And it's picked up all around the world. And we really emphasize the nonverbal dimension, which is really the spiritual dimension and the heart to heart. So It was interesting, just as I was walking up here, I heard a woman saying that she really appreciated my message about the heart and love. And that's really, to me, ultimately, if we are going to change the culture in the larger system, it has to be heart to heart, person to person. So I have a dream, something called community CPR, where we will actually, and we started to do it, hold larger meetings in many different realms. And we've gotten emotional CPR out to 16 countries now, and it's been translated into 6 languages. And even places you wouldn't expect or imagine, like Japan and Taiwan, and Singapore, they've been quite eager and interested. Iceland, Sweden, no, not Sweden yet, Poland. So we're trying to really also use this as hopefully a common language so that people can communicate beyond any one national language, but the language of emotions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Daniel.